The caterer, a man with a tired face and a stain on his tie, cleared his throat. The sound was a small, apologetic cough, yet it cut through the muted grief of the reception hall like a crack of thunder. Adrian felt a dozen pairs of eyes shift towards him. They were standing in a tastefully decorated but somber room adjacent to the chapel where he had just said his final goodbye to his mother. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and professionally brewed coffee. "Sir," the caterer said, his voice a low murmur meant only for Adrian, but in the sudden quiet it carried. "The outstanding balance. The card was declined." The words hung in the air, heavy and obscene. Declined. A simple, brutal word that stripped away the dignity of the occasion, replacing solemnity with a sordid, public failure. Adrian felt the blood drain from his face, a cold hollowness spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with humiliation. He could feel his wife, Isabella, stiffen beside him. He didn't need to see her face to know the expression she wore. A tight, disappointed frown, the precursor to a lecture. From his wallet, Adrian produced a second card, a different account. He held it out, his hands steady despite the tremor in his soul. "Please, try this one." The caterer nodded and retreated to his small, portable terminal. The few seconds he was gone felt like an eternity. Adrian's gaze drifted across the room, catching the sympathetic, pitying glances of his mother's friends, the barely concealed smirks of Isabella's family. Her father, Marcus, a man who measured worth in stock portfolios and luxury vehicle models, was watching him with an expression of profound, weary disappointment, as if this was the inevitable, pathetic conclusion to a long-running joke. Then came the second blow, quieter but somehow sharper. "I'm sorry, sir, that one as well." The hollowness inside Adrian fractured, a spiderweb of shame. He was a man who designed complex financial systems, a man who could trace the flow of billions of digital dollars through unseen networks. And in this moment, he could not pay for the sandwiches and coffee at his own mother's funeral. The irony was a bitter, metallic taste in his mouth. Before he could even speak, to ask for a moment, to make a call, Isabella moved. Her action was a fluid, practiced display of taking charge. She stepped in front of him, physically shielding the caterer from his view, as if protecting a civilian from an active threat. "I'll handle this," she said, her voice a sharp, efficient whisper that sliced through Adrian's paralysis. It was a tone she often used with him, the one reserved for his perceived inadequacies, for when he forgot to take out the recycling or failed to book a dinner reservation at a restaurant she deemed acceptable. She turned to him, her eyes not angry, but worse, disappointed and tired, as if he were a difficult child. "Adrian, honestly, today of all days." She shook her head, a small theatrical gesture of exasperation for the benefit of the watching audience. "Don't worry," she said to the caterer, her voice suddenly warmer, more commanding. "I have it." She pulled out her own wallet, a sleek leather accessory bearing the logo of a brand he knew cost more than his first car. From it, she produced a glossy, platinum card from Titan Bank, the institution where she was a rising star in the fraud prevention department. She tapped it against the terminal with a flourish. The machine chirped its approval. A green light. Success. Isabella signed the receipt, her movements crisp and definitive. She tore off the customer copy and, in the most damning gesture of all, handed it not to the caterer, but to Adrian. "Here," she said, her voice low again, but laced with a new, cutting edge. "A record of the expense, for your budget." He took the slip of paper. His fingers felt numb. It wasn't a receipt, it was a verdict. It was a declaration of his incompetence, handed down by his wife in front of everyone who mattered to him on the worst day of his life. He looked at her, at the woman he had married, and saw a stranger wearing a mask of condescending pity. She thought she was solving a problem. She thought she was being the responsible adult. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly comprehend, was that she had just frozen the personal account of the man who had architected the very system she was using to humiliate him. She had used his own creation as a weapon against him, and in doing so, she had set in motion a chain of events that would unravel not just their marriage, but her entire world. The bill for his mother's funeral was settled. The bill for this moment of cruelty, however, was about to come due. We hope you're finding yourself drawn into Adrian's story. It's a situation many have felt in some way, that feeling of being underestimated, of not being seen for who you truly are. If you're already feeling that righteous anger on his behalf, do us a favor and tap that like button. It really helps the story reach more people. And make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because you will not want to miss the moment the tables turn. We love knowing where our viewers are watching from, so drop a comment below and let us know what city you're in. Now, let's get back to the quiet before the storm. The humiliation at the funeral was not an isolated incident. It was the grand, public culmination of 1,000 smaller cuts. To understand the depth of Isabella's blindness, one had to understand the narrative she had constructed for their life together. It was a story she told herself, her family, and her friends, a story in which she was the ambitious, practical hero, saddled with a well-meaning but ultimately ineffectual husband. They had met 7 years ago. She was a freshly minted MBA, fiercely ambitious, interning at Titan Bank's corporate headquarters. He was introduced to her at a charity gala as a freelance consultant in tech architecture. It was a vague, unimpressive title, and he offered it with a humble shrug that she had, at the time, found charmingly unpretentious. He was handsome, quiet, and possessed a calm, steady presence that was a balm to her own frenetic energy. He listened. He seemed to see past the polished, aggressive armor she wore for the corporate world and appreciate the person underneath. In those early days, his lack of overt ambition was a feature, not a bug. She was the star, and he was her quiet, supportive base. He didn't compete with her. He celebrated her victories. When she got her first promotion, he filled their small apartment with her favorite flowers. When she had a brutal week at work, he would have dinner waiting and a bath drawn, never demanding anything in return. He was, she thought, the perfect partner for a woman on the rise. The problems began when her rise started to accelerate. Her world became one of corporate hierarchies, lavish company retreats, and a social circle where status was everything. Her colleagues had husbands who were surgeons, investment bankers, or partners at prestigious law firms. They had titles that sounded important, business cards with embossed lettering, and salaries that were easy to quantify and admire. Adrian, meanwhile, remained a freelance consultant. He worked from a small office in their increasingly spacious home, a room she privately referred to as his hobby room. He would spend hours in there, surrounded by whiteboards covered in what looked like gibberish, complex diagrams, lines of code, and algorithmic flowcharts. When she asked what he was working on, he would try to explain, using terms like back-end scalability, asynchronous processing, and multi-layered security protocols. Her eyes would glaze over. It sounded like make-believe, the digital equivalent of a grown man playing with model trains. "But what do you do?" she would press, frustrated. "Who is your boss? What company do you work for?" "I don't really have a boss," he would say calmly. "I work on contracts for different clients." "What clients?" "It's complicated, Izzy. Most of it is under non-disclosure agreements." This was, for her, the most infuriating part. His work was a black box. There was no prestigious company name to drop at dinner parties. There was no clear career ladder he was climbing. Money simply appeared in their joint account, respectable sums at first, then increasingly substantial ones. But the deposits were erratic, coming from shell corporations and holding companies with bland, anonymous names like Nexus Innovations or Argent Digital Solutions. It felt to her like unsteady, almost illicit income. It lacked the reassuring regularity of a bi-weekly paycheck from a Fortune 500 company. Her father, Marcus, did little to help. He had never approved of Adrian. Marcus was a man of solid, tangible assets: real estate, a successful import-export business, a stock portfolio heavy on blue-chip industrials. He understood corner offices in German sedans. He did not understand a man who wore jeans and a hoodie to work and claimed to earn a living by thinking. "The boy has no grit," Marcus had told Isabella a year into the marriage, after Adrian had politely declined his offer of a real job managing a warehouse. "A man needs a proper career, something with a pension. This computer nonsense, it's a phase." Isabella had defended Adrian then, but as the years wore on, Marcus's words began to echo in her own mind. She started to see Adrian's quiet nature not as calm, but as passivity. His humility not as a virtue, but as a lack of drive. She loved him, she told herself, but she also felt a growing need to manage him, to guide him, to compensate for his perceived shortcomings. She took over their finances, ostensibly to help him focus on his projects. She would look at the large, sporadic deposits from Nexus Innovations with suspicion, moving the funds immediately into safer, more traditional investments she controlled. She insisted they use her bank, Titan Bank, for everything. It was, she reasoned, more secure. She had an inside track. She could keep an eye on things. This control gave her a sense of security that Adrian's opaque profession could not. The belittling started subtly. It was in the way she would re-explain simple financial concepts to him, the way she would talk about her work in glowing, dramatic terms, while summarizing his day with a dismissive, "And Adrian was consulting." It escalated to her making jokes at his expense in front of friends, painting him as a lovable, technologically gifted man-child who couldn't be trusted with the household budget. He never fought back. He would simply absorb the barbs with that same unnerving calm, his expression unreadable. He would sometimes get a look in his eyes, a distant, analytical look, as if he wasn't her husband being insulted, but a scientist observing a curious specimen. This placidity only enraged her further. It was like punching a pillow. The lack of resistance was infuriating. The final piece of her self-deceiving narrative fell into place when Titan Bank launched its revolutionary new mobile banking platform, Titan OS. It was a masterpiece of user-friendly design and impenetrable security. It swept industry awards and became the new gold standard. Isabella, working in the fraud department, was intimately involved in the rollout and the ongoing security monitoring. She felt a fierce sense of ownership over it. She spoke of our app, our platform, our tech. She had sat in dozens of meetings where the mysterious third-party developer, Nexus Innovations, was praised in hushed, reverent tones. She never made the connection. Why would she? In her mind, the brilliant, anonymous architects of Titan OS were mythical titans of the tech world, not the man who sometimes forgot to load the dishwasher. The man she was married to was just Adrian, her sweet, simple, financially challenged husband. And it was this utter, unshakable conviction that led her, on the day of his mother's funeral, to commit an act of such catastrophic arrogance. Back in the reception hall, the air, already heavy with sorrow, was now thick with a new kind of tension. The immediate crisis of the catering bill had been solved by Isabella, but the solution had created a far deeper problem. Adrian stood frozen, the flimsy receipt still clutched in his hand. It felt like a brand, a mark of his public shaming. Just as the awkward silence threatened to become permanent, Marcus, Isabella's father, strode into the void. He moved with the unearned confidence of a man who had never had a credit card declined in his life. He clapped a heavy hand on Adrian's shoulder, a gesture that was meant to look like commiseration, but felt like a physical assertion of dominance. There, son," Marcus said, his voice booming, drawing even more attention. "No need to worry. We've got it covered. Family helps family. He conveniently ignored the fact that Adrian was the one who had just lost his mother. In this drama, Marcus was casting himself as the benevolent patriarch and Adrian as the charity case. He turned to the room at large, raising his voice to ensure everyone could hear his magnanimity. These things happen. A little cash flow hiccup. In times of grief, the mind isn't on practicalities. He smiled, a wide, predatory grin that didn't reach his eyes. That's what family is for, to be practical. He then pulled out his own wallet, a fat alligator skin monstrosity, and extracted a black, impossibly exclusive credit card. He walked over to the caterer, who was packing up his terminal. "Let me just settle up for any extras," Marcus announced loudly. "And please, add a generous tip for your staff, for their patience." The caterer, flustered, tried to explain that the bill was fully paid. "No, sir, Mrs. Sterling already took care of it." "Nonsense," Marcus boomed. "Isabella used a joint card, I'm sure. This is an expense a father should bear." He was rewriting the narrative in real time, positioning himself as the ultimate savior, erasing even Isabella's role to place himself at the center. He was attempting to purchase not just the food, but the moral high ground. Isabella watched her father, a flicker of irritation crossing her face at being upstaged, but it was quickly replaced by a look of fond approval. He was reinforcing the family ethos: strength, decisiveness, and the public application of wealth as a solution to all problems. She glanced at Adrian, expecting to see gratitude. Instead, she saw nothing. His face was a blank mask, his eyes dark and empty. He had retreated so far inside himself that he was barely present in the room. He felt a strange sense of dissociation, as if he were watching a poorly written play. These people, his family by marriage, were moving their mouths, saying words, but the meaning was distorted, filtered through a haze of grief and a rising, cold anger. His hand, of its own accord, slipped into the pocket of his tailored suit trousers. His fingers found a small, familiar object, a smooth, rectangular piece of plastic and metal. It was a USB drive, a simple, unbranded thing he always carried. On it was a heavily encrypted copy of the original source code for the banking software that ran not just Titan Bank, but dozens of banks around the world. It was his creation, his life's work, his masterpiece. It was the source of the erratic income and the foundation of a fortune that would make Marcus's import-export business look like a child's lemonade stand. He closed his fingers around it. The drive was cool to the touch. It was a grounding object, a secret talisman. As Marcus pontificated and Isabella looked on with smug satisfaction, Adrian traced the hard edges of the drive with his thumb. Each condescending word, each pitying glance was being recorded, filed away in a part of his mind that was cold, precise, and patient. He wasn't a victim in this play, he was the author. And he was beginning to realize that the current act had gone on for far too long. He looked up and his eyes met Isabella's. For a fleeting second, he let the mask drop. He let her see a flicker of the cold fury simmering beneath the surface. He saw her recoil slightly, a brief moment of confusion in her eyes. She had never seen that look from him before. It was hard, unforgiving, and utterly alien. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. He replaced it with the familiar, placid expression she knew. The moment passed. She dismissed it as a trick of the light, a symptom of his grief. "Adrian," she said, her voice softening slightly now that the public part of the performance was over. "Let's get you a glass of water. You look pale." He allowed her to lead him to a chair. He sat down, the picture of a grieving, overwhelmed husband. He let her fuss over him. He let Marcus clap him on the shoulder one last time. He played his part. But inside, a decision had been made. The period of quiet observation was over. The period of strategic response was about to begin. The code on the USB drive in his pocket was all about rules, logic, and consequences. If a certain condition was met, a specific action was triggered. If X, then Y. Isabella and her father had just met a condition. The corresponding action was now inevitable. The drive home from the funeral was a study in silence. The heavy, luxury sedan, a car Isabella had insisted they buy because it projected the right image, glided through the darkening city streets. The interior was a cocoon of leather and polished wood, designed to insulate its occupants from the noise and unpleasantness of the outside world. Tonight it served only to amplify the suffocating tension between them. Adrian drove, his hands resting lightly on the wheel. He stared straight ahead, his gaze fixed on the endless ribbon of asphalt and taillights. His mind, however, was far away, replaying the scene at the reception hall with the detached precision of a computer simulation. He analyzed every word, every gesture, every look of pity and condescension. He wasn't dwelling in self-pity, he was gathering data. Isabella sat in the passenger seat, rigid with a combination of self-righteousness and frustration. She had been waiting for him to speak, to apologize, to show some sign of remorse for the embarrassment he had caused. His silence was, to her, another form of failure, a refusal to engage, to take responsibility. Finally, she could bear it no longer. "I just don't understand it, Adrian," she began, her voice carefully controlled, as if she were addressing a subordinate during a performance review. "How could you let that happen?" Adrian didn't respond immediately. He signaled, changed lanes, and navigated a complex intersection before finally speaking. "It was a mistake, Izzy, a technical error." "A technical error?" she scoffed, the control in her voice starting to fray. "Both of your cards? At your own mother's funeral? It's not a technical error, Adrian. It's a pattern. It's what I've been talking about for years. You're not on top of things. You're not reliable." The accusation, so bald and dismissive, hung between them. Reliable. He, who had built a global software platform renowned for its 99.999% uptime, was being called unreliable by a mid-level manager who thought rebooting the router was a sophisticated technical solution. "The funds were there," he said, his voice still unnervingly calm. "There was a security flag on the account, an unexpected large-sum transaction from an unusual vendor terminal. It's a standard fraud prevention protocol." Isabella laughed, a short, sharp, humorless sound. "Oh, please don't try to explain my own job to me. I know what a fraud alert is. The question is, why was your account so fragile that one catering bill could trigger it? My card worked just fine. My father's card would have worked just fine. It's about having a solid financial base, Adrian. Something you've never seemed to grasp." She turned in her seat to face him more directly, her voice taking on a lecturing tone. "This is what worries me. You live in this little bubble in your home office, playing with your codes. But the real world has rules. It has responsibilities. What if that had been a medical emergency? What if one of the kids, if we had kids, needed something urgently? Your card gets declined, and then what? I have to swoop in and save the day again?" Every word was a carefully aimed dart, designed to find a vulnerability and poison it with doubt. She was framing his grief as a distraction, his work as a childish game, and his financial hiccup as a profound moral failing. Adrian remained silent, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Inside his mind, a storm was raging, not of anger, but of cold, hard clarity. He saw with perfect, painful precision the vast, unbridgeable chasm between them. She didn't just misunderstand his work, she fundamentally disrespected him as a man, as a partner. She saw him as a project to be managed, a liability to be contained. His silence only emboldened her. "And your mother," she continued, her voice softening into a tone of faux sympathy that was more insulting than her anger. "I know you're grieving, but she enabled this, you know. She was always so proud of her brilliant boy, never pushing you to do more, to be more. She let you believe that being clever was enough. It's not. The world demands more than just being clever. That was the line. The one he hadn't known existed until she crossed it. Bringing his mother into it, using his grief as a weapon, twisting her unwavering love and belief in him into a criticism. A single, devastating thought cut through his carefully maintained control. She deserves what's coming. It wasn't a thought born of malice, but of a simple, brutal logic. Like a surgeon identifying a diseased limb that must be amputated to save the body. Their marriage wasn't just sick, it was necrotic, and her arrogance was the source of the infection. He pulled the car into the driveway of their large, modern house. A house bought and paid for with the proceeds from his hobby. He cut the engine. The sudden silence was absolute. He turned to her. His face was calm, his expression placid, but his eyes, had she been perceptive enough to truly see them, held the cold, distant light of a dying star. "You're right," he said softly. Isabella was taken aback. She had expected an argument, a defense, a retreat into sullen silence. Agreement was not on the menu of possible outcomes. I'm right?" "You're right," he repeated, his voice a low, even monotone. "I haven't been reliable. I haven't been on top of things, and my finances are clearly a mess. It's time I took it all more seriously." A wave of relief washed over her, followed by a surge of vindication. Finally, a breakthrough. He was finally seeing things her way. She had gotten through to him. "Well," she said, a triumphant smile playing on her lips. "I'm glad you see that. We can work on this, Adrian, together. We'll set up a proper budget. I can help you." "Yes," he said, his gaze turning towards the house. "You will help me." He got out of the car, leaving her to bask in her victory. She watched him walk towards the front door, his back straight, his stride purposeful. She felt a swell of affection for him, the kind one feels for a prodigal son who has finally come to his senses. She had done it. She had saved him from himself. She had no idea that he had just agreed to her terms, but on a scale she could not even begin to imagine. He was going to take his finances seriously, and she and her entire world were about to become his first and most serious project. The next morning, Isabella strode into the gleaming glass and steel atrium of the Titan Bank headquarters with a renewed sense of purpose. The events of the previous day, which would have been a source of profound shame for anyone else, had instead become a source of strength for her. She had faced a crisis, acted decisively, and brought her wayward husband back into line. She felt powerful. Her office was on the 27th floor, in the Digital Fraud and Security Division. It was a high-tech nerve center filled with monitors displaying real-time transaction data, threat-level maps, and security alerts. This was her domain. Here she was not just Isabella Sterling, wife of a struggling consultant. Here she was Ms. Sterling, a respected manager, a guardian of the bank's digital fortress. "Tough weekend?" asked her colleague Ben, as she set her coffee and designer handbag on her desk. Ben was perpetually rumpled and cynical, but a sharp analyst. "You could say that," Isabella said, pulling off her coat. She allowed herself a small, weary sigh. "Family drama, you know how it is." She had no intention of sharing the embarrassing details, but she couldn't resist hinting at her own heroic role. Sometimes you just have to be the adult in the room, even when it's uncomfortable. Ben grunted non-committally and turned back to his screen. Isabella logged into her system. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, a familiar, comforting rhythm. She brought up the internal account management tool. It was a powerful program, granting her a level of access far beyond that of a standard bank teller. It was meant for investigating high-level fraud, but it was an open secret that managers occasionally used it for other things. A little peek at a new boyfriend's credit score, a check on a rival colleague's mortgage application. It was unethical but common. On a whim, driven by a need to reaffirm the control she had established the night before, she typed in Adrian's name and social security number. She didn't need to look it up. She had memorized it years ago when she had first organized their finances. His profile appeared on her screen. Sterling, Adrian J. A picture of him from their wedding day smiled out at her. A happy, carefree man who no longer seemed to exist. She scanned the details: current balance, recent transactions, linked accounts. And there it was, in bold red letters at the top of the screen. Account frozen. Manual override. Sterling, a period dot into the screen. Manual frozen. Sterling, a period dot into the screen. EMPID 774-B. A small, satisfying thrill went through her. There it was, proof of her action. She had done that. From a handheld terminal at a funeral reception, she had reached into the digital heart of Titan Bank and asserted her authority over her husband's financial life. The system had logged her employee ID, her digital fingerprint, at the scene of the crime. She clicked on the details of the freeze. The reason she had given the system a quick selection from a drop-down menu was suspected account compromise / unusual spending pattern. It was a plausible, defensible action. If anyone ever asked, she could claim she was acting to protect their joint assets from a potential hack. It was a lie, of course. She was protecting their assets from her husband's perceived incompetence. She looked at the account balance. The number was substantial, far more than the average person kept in a checking account, but to her it looked depleted, vulnerable. She saw the recent large deposit from Nexus Innovations and frowned. That unpredictable phantom money. She initiated a transfer, moving the majority of the funds from Adrian's now frozen personal account into a joint savings account that she had sole administrative control over. The transfer confirmation popped up instantly. Funds successfully moved. She leaned back in her ergonomic chair, a genuine smile spreading across her face. It was done. She had ring-fenced the bulk of their cash, protecting it from his irresponsibility. The frozen account was now a husk, containing only a few $1,000s. When he eventually came to her, hat in hand, asking why his card was still not working, she would explain. She would show him the new budget she planned to draw up. She would walk him through the steps he needed to take to be more responsible. It would be a teachable moment. Thinking about the Titan OS license renewal, Ben said suddenly, startling her. He was swiveling in his chair to face her. Read the morning brief? Nexus is playing hardball. Isabella's focus snapped back to the office. Nexus Innovations? The developers? What about them? Rumor from the CTO's office is they're proposing a 40% fee increase on the new 5-year license, and they want to insert an ethics and integrity clause. An ethics clause? What does that even mean for a software license? Isabella asked, annoyed at the interruption. Means if the bank is found to have acted in a way that damages the brand integrity of the Titan OS platform, Nexus can terminate the contract with 24 hours notice. Isabella rolled her eyes. That's ridiculous. We are the brand. It's called Titan OS, for God's sake. They're just a vendor, a very well-paid vendor. I don't know, Ben said, chewing on the end of a pen. These guys are ghosts. No one's ever met them. The CTO communicates with them through some encrypted portal. They've got all the leverage. This bank, this entire building, runs on their code. If they pull the plug, he trailed off, shaking his head. The board would pay anything to stop that from happening. 40% is a bargain. Isabella scoffed. They won't pull the plug. It's a negotiation tactic. These tech guys are all the same. Arrogant. They think because they can write a bit of code, they can dictate terms to a $100 billion institution. They'll posture, and then they'll take the money. They always take the money. She turned back to her screen, dismissing the conversation. Her focus was on her own small, successful power play. The machinations of the C-suite in some phantom tech company felt a million miles away. She was busy managing her own little corner of the world, putting her own house in order. She clicked log out on Adrian's account profile. The screen went blank. She felt a sense of closure, of accomplishment. She had tidied up a messy problem. She was a good wife, a responsible partner. She was in control. And in the cold, sterile logic of the banking system she so admired, she had just provided an immutable, time-stamped, digitally signed record of exactly what she had done, to whom, and why. A data point she was certain would never see the light of day. While Isabella was rearranging the deck chairs on her personal Titanic, Adrian was in the engine room, preparing to change the ship's course. His home office, the room Isabella dismissed as a den of hobbies and procrastination, was in fact the command center of a silent global empire. It was spare and minimalist, dominated by a single massive desk made of reclaimed timber and steel. On it sat a sleek, custom-built computer rig with 3 large curved monitors. The whiteboards that she found so nonsensical were in reality roadmaps for future technological revolutions. He wasn't grieving in the way Isabella expected. His sorrow for his mother was a deep, quiet river flowing beneath the surface of his thoughts, but it did not incapacitate him. Instead, it had sharpened his focus. His mother had been his staunchest believer. She was the one who had bought him his first computer, a clunky, beige box, and had watched with pride as he taught himself to write his first lines of code. "You see the world differently, Adrian," she used to say. "Don't ever let anyone make you feel small for that." Humiliating him at her funeral was not just an attack on him, it was a desecration of her memory, and that was unforgivable. On the central monitor, a secure video connection was open. The face on the screen belonged to Julian Vance, Adrian's partner and the public-facing CEO of Nexus Innovations. Julian was everything Adrian was not: flamboyant, sharp-tongued, and dressed in a bespoke suit that probably cost more than Isabella's handbag. He was the lightning, Adrian was the thunder. "The vultures are circling," Julian said without preamble. He was holding a tablet, swiping through documents. "Titan Bank's board is panicking about the license renewal. Our 40% ask has them sweating. They've countered at 15. "Decline it," Adrian said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Tell them our initial offer was a courtesy. The price is now 60%, and the ethics clause is non-negotiable." Julian raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. 60? Are you trying to start a war or just buy yourself a small country? They'll scream. "Let them scream," Adrian replied. Their profit margins on the consumer banking division increased by 200% last year, almost entirely due to the efficiency gains and new customer acquisition driven by Titan OS. They can afford it. This isn't about the money, Julian. You know that. "Oh, I know," Julian said, his expression softening. "I'm sorry about your mother, my friend. I wish I could have been there." "Thank you," Adrian said, the first crack in his stoic facade. "She would have liked you. She appreciated people with flair." "And I'm sorry about Isabella," Julian added, his voice more cautious. Adrian's face hardened again. "Don't be. She is no longer a factor for you to be sorry about." Julian leaned closer to his camera, his eyes narrowing. "What happened? Your message last night was cryptic." Adrian took a slow breath. "She did exactly what we predicted she might do, years ago, when we first built the spouse protocol into the security parameters." Julian's eyes widened in comprehension. "No, she didn't. The funeral?" The spouse protocol was a dark joke between them from the early days. While building the ultra-secure administrative access tools, they had imagined nightmare scenarios. What if a key developer's spouse, working at the bank, went rogue? They had built in a series of silent alarms and tripwires at the highest privilege levels. Any employee accessing the account of a Nexus-flagged individual, a tiny secret list containing only Adrian, Julian, and a few core engineers, using high-level security tools for non-official purposes, would trigger a cascade of alerts within Nexus's own private network while remaining invisible to the bank's internal security. It was a theoretical failsafe. They never imagined they would actually use it. She used her manager override to freeze my personal checking account, Adrian said, his voice a low growl, in the middle of my mother's funeral reception, to pay the caterer. Then she transferred the remaining funds to an account she controls. Julian was silent for a long moment, his expression a mixture of shock and fury. That woman, he finally breathed. She has a master's in business administration and the ethical framework of a piranha. He shook his head. The system recorded it all? Every keystroke, Adrian confirmed. He brought up a new window on his screen, a raw data log that was pure, elegant simplicity. It showed a timeline. 2014-03 UTC, employee 774-B, Sterling I, initiated manual account freeze on account holder 8801-Adrian-S. 2014 UTC, reason code, suspected _compromise _unusual _spend. 2014-11 UTC, action confirmed, account status frozen. 133521 UTC, employee 774-B initiated funds transfer. 133528 UTC, transfer of 94.7% of available funds from 8801-Adrian-S to joint savings 4512-Sterling-Joint confirmed. She even created her own paper trail, Julian mused, a hint of admiration in his voice. It's almost beautiful in its sheer, unadulterated hubris. She used the very tools you built to protect the system from external threats to perpetrate an internal one against you, and she documented it. It's the final data point in a 7-year study, Adrian said, his voice cold. The hypothesis is proven. The experiment is over. So, what's the protocol? Julian asked, his voice now all business. Phase 1 is the license negotiation. That's in motion. What's Phase 2? Phase 2 is the personal element, Adrian said. He looked around his office, at the whiteboards covered in his life's work. She thinks this room is a joke. She thinks my work is a hobby. She thinks I am a failure she needs to manage. He swiveled his chair to face the window, which overlooked the sprawling garden he had designed and planted himself. For 7 years I have lived a double life. I have hidden my success to make her feel comfortable. I have downplayed my achievements to avoid bruising her ego. I have allowed her and her family to treat me as a charity case. I did it because I loved her, and I thought that was what love required. Sacrifice. He paused, his reflection staring back at him from the dark glass. I was wrong. Love does not require self-annihilation, and respect cannot be given to someone who is incapable of showing it. He turned back to Julian. Phase 2 is a demonstration, not of power, but of reality. I'm going to give her exactly what she wants. I'm going to take my finances seriously. I'm going to be reliable. I'm going to show her what my hobby is really worth. And how, precisely? Julian asked. She and her father are planning something, Adrian said. I can feel it. They think I'm wounded, weak. They're going to try to formalize my dependency, to lock me down. A postnup, a financial agreement, something of that nature. They will summon me for a family meeting. Julian grinned slowly. And you're going to attend? I am, Adrian confirmed. And I'm going to bring a guest. Me? Julian asked, delighted. No, Adrian said. You're the strategic bomber. I need a ground force insertion. I'm bringing our lawyer, And you, my friend, will be on standby. When I give the signal, you will activate Phase 3. And Phase 3 is? Adrian's expression was grim. The ethics clause. We're going to call their bluff. We're going to inform the board of Titan Bank that one of their managers has used their privileged access for malicious personal gain, compromising the integrity of the Titan OS platform. We're going to invoke the termination clause. Julian let out a low whistle. You're going to burn the whole bank to the ground to get at her? No, Adrian corrected him. I'm not going to burn it down. I'm going to buy it. He looked directly into the camera, his eyes blazing with an intensity Julian had not seen in years. And then I'm going to remodel. 3 days passed. They were 3 of the strangest days of Adrian's life. On the surface, a fragile, artificial peace had settled over the house. Isabella, believing she had won a major victory, was a model of solicitous concern. She made his favorite meals. She asked about his day in the hobby room with a newfound, albeit patronizing, interest. She spoke of the future, of their finances, of the new, responsible path they were now on together. It was like living with a ghost who didn't know it was dead. Adrian played his part with chilling perfection. He was quiet, seemingly contrite. He listened to her plans for a new, stricter household budget. He nodded meekly when she explained that she had consolidated their liquid assets into a more secure, high-yield savings account. It's just safer this way, honey, she explained, patting his hand. Until you get your consulting work on a more stable footing, think of me as your financial manager. Thank you, Izzy, he had said, his voice a perfect blend of gratitude and resignation. I don't know what I'd do without you. The summons came on a Wednesday evening. It was delivered by Isabella, but the words were clearly her father's. Dad was thinking, she began, as they were clearing the dinner plates, and he and I agree. Now that we're getting serious about our financial future, it might be a good idea to get everything down on paper, to make it all official. Adrian paused, a plate in his hand. Official? You know, she said, avoiding his eyes, just to protect everyone, to clarify things. He's invited us over for a drink tomorrow night, to talk it through. It wasn't an invitation, it was a subpoena. A family meeting to be held on her father's turf, the opulent, ridiculously grand house that served as the family's seat of power. It was a classic Marcus power play. Control the environment, control the negotiation. Of course, Adrian said simply. What time? Isabella was visibly relieved by his easy acquiescence. 7:30, just a casual chat. The next evening, Adrian dressed carefully. He chose a simple, dark gray suit, a crisp white shirt, but no tie. It was a subtle signal. He was playing their game, but not entirely by their rules. As he was about to leave his office, he picked up the simple, unbranded USB drive from his desk. He held it for a moment, then slipped it into his jacket pocket. When he came downstairs, Isabella was waiting. She was dressed in a sharp, tailored dress, looking every bit the successful bank executive. She looked him up and down. You look nice, she said, a hint of surprise in her voice. You said it was a casual chat, he replied with a small smile. It is, she said quickly, but it's important to be prepared. The drive to Marcus's house was filled with Isabella's nervous chatter about the stock market, her latest project at the bank, anything but the real reason for their visit. Adrian remained mostly silent, a calm island in the stream of her anxiety. He knew what was coming. He had run the simulations in his head 100 times. Marcus's house was less a home and more a monument to his own success. A sprawling neoclassical monstrosity with more columns than the Parthenon, it was designed to intimidate. They were greeted at the door by a silent housekeeper and shown into Marcus's study. The room smelled of old leather, expensive scotch, and self-satisfaction. Marcus was seated behind a desk the size of a small car. Isabella took a seat in one of the 2 smaller chairs arranged before the desk, a supplicant before a king. Adrian remained standing. Adrian, my boy, good of you to come, Marcus began, gesturing for Adrian to take the remaining seat. Drink? No, thank you, Marcus, Adrian said, his voice calm and even. Let's just get to it. Marcus and Isabella exchanged a look. His refusal to play the part of the grateful guest had thrown off the opening rhythm of their script. Marcus cleared his throat and picked up a thick document from his desk. It was bound in a dark blue cover. Isabella and I have been talking, and we as a family are concerned. Your financial situation, the incident at the funeral, it has highlighted a certain instability. We want to help you. We want to provide a safety net. He pushed the document across the polished surface of the desk. This is a post-nuptial financial agreement. My lawyers drew it up. It's quite standard. Adrian didn't move to take it. A post-nup? It's for your own good, Adrian, Isabella chimed in, her voice earnest. It separates our finances legally. Your consulting income, your debts, they remain yours. My salary, my assets, the family trust, they remain protected. It means if one of your projects goes bust, you won't pull the whole family down with you. She was trying to sell it as a life raft she was offering him. But it was an anchor. It was a legal document designed to formalize his status as a dependent, to strip him of any claim to the life he had built with her. A life funded almost entirely by him. They were trying to legally disenfranchise him from his own success, which they didn't even know existed. It ensures you'll always be taken care of, Marcus added, his tone avuncular and deeply condescending. The house, the cars, as long as you're with Isabella, you'll want for nothing. But on paper, it's clear who the provider is. It simplifies things. Adrian looked from Marcus's smug face to Isabella's anxious one. He saw no malice in her eyes, only a profound, misguided belief that she was doing the right thing, that she was saving him. It was, in its own way, more damning than any deliberate cruelty. So, to be clear, Adrian said, his voice dangerously quiet, you want me to sign a document that says I am financially incompetent, a document that legally defines me as a dependent. You want me to cede all control of my financial future in exchange for a comfortable, dependent life, provided by the generosity of you and your daughter. It's not like that, Isabella started, but Marcus cut her off. That is a crude way of putting it, but yes, Marcus said, his patience wearing thin. It's a dose of reality, son. Time to face the music. Adrian finally moved. He walked to the desk, but he didn't pick up the document. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket. His fingers closed around the cool metal and plastic of the USB drive. He looked at Isabella. Remember that night we met? I told you I was a consultant in tech architecture. Yes, she said, confused by the change of topic. I was consulting for a consortium of banks, helping them design the security framework for a next-generation mobile banking platform. He placed the USB drive on the coffee table between them. It landed with a soft, insignificant click. The object was so small, so plain, in the opulent, oversized room. I built it, Izzy, he said, his voice no longer quiet, but filled with a resonant power that made both her and Marcus sit up straighter. The entire thing, from the first line of code to the final encryption algorithm. Titan OS isn't just something I use, it's something I own. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus and Isabella stared at the small USB drive as if it were a venomous snake. The statement was so audacious, so utterly at odds with the man they thought they knew, that for a moment they simply couldn't process it. Marcus was the first to recover. He let out a short, barking laugh. Own it? Son, you're more delusional than I thought. That's a billion-dollar platform. It's owned by Titan Bank. No, Adrian said, his voice cutting through Marcus's laughter like a scalpel. Titan Bank licenses it. They pay an exorbitant fee for the privilege of putting their name on my work. They license it from a company called Nexus Innovations. The name dropped into the room like a stone. Isabella's face went pale. Nexus Innovations, the phantom developers, the arrogant tech guys playing hardball, the company Ben had been talking about. You, you work for Nexus? She stammered, her mind racing, trying to fit this new, impossible piece into the puzzle of her husband. Adrian gave a sad, weary smile. Izzy, I don't work for Nexus Innovations. I am Nexus Innovations. Julian Vance is my CEO, my partner, my voice. But the company, the code, the intellectual property, it's mine. He gestured to the post-nuptial agreement on the desk. You want to talk about finances? Let's talk about finances. The house we live in? I paid for it. In cash. The car you drive? I paid for that too. Your salary, your bonuses, the very existence of your department at the bank. They are all downstream from the work I do in my hobby room. He leaned forward, placing his hands on the back of the chair opposite them. He was no longer the defendant in this trial. He was the judge. You want to talk about the incident at the funeral? He continued, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. Let's be very clear. My account wasn't frozen because of insufficient funds. My personal accounts currently hold more liquid assets than your father's entire business is worth. It was frozen because my wife, a mid-level manager at the bank, used her privileged security access to maliciously and unethically interfere with a private client's account. My account. He looked directly at Isabella, and for the first time, she saw him. Not the passive, agreeable man she thought she had married, but a titan of industry, a quiet genius whose patience she had mistaken for weakness. You thought you were being the responsible adult, he said, his voice laced with a terrible, tragic irony. You thought you were protecting the family assets, but Isabella, you don't have any family assets. All the assets, all the money you've been so carefully managing, it's all mine. And you just provided me with a perfect, time-stamped, digitally signed record of your attempt to steal it. Just then, Marcus's phone buzzed violently on the desk. He glanced at it, his face contorting in confusion and alarm. It's from Richard Cromwell, he hissed, naming the CEO of Titan Bank's parent holding company. He's summoning me to an emergency board meeting. Now. What the hell is going on? As if on cue, the doors to the study swung open. It was not the housekeeper this time. A tall, impeccably dressed man stood in the doorway. It was Julian Vance. He was holding a tablet and smiling a smile that was all teeth. That would be my doing, Julian announced, striding into the room as if he owned it. Marcus Sterling, Isabella Sterling, I presume? Julian Vance, CEO of Nexus Innovations. Adrian, I trust you brought them up to speed? Isabella stared, dumbfounded. The mythical CEO, the ghost in the machine, was standing in her father's study, and he had just called her husband by his first name. Julian didn't wait for an answer. He turned his gaze on Marcus. Mr. Cromwell is waiting for you, Marcus. It seems there's been a significant development regarding the Titan OS license. We've just informed the board that due to a severe breach of the platform's integrity by a Titan Bank employee, we are exercising the ethics and integrity clause we recently insisted upon. He looked at Isabella, his eyes cold and unforgiving. Your actions, Miss Sterling, have been deemed a direct threat to the security and reputation of our platform. As such, our licensing agreement with Titan Bank will be terminated in 24 hours. Marcus looked like he had been punched. Terminated? You can't. It would destroy the bank. It would cause global financial chaos. Oh, we can, Julian said cheerfully. It's right there in the contract your own lawyers approved this morning. But we're not unreasonable people. We are prepared to offer an alternative. We will waive the termination on one condition. He paused for dramatic effect, letting the weight of the moment press down on them. Nexus Innovations will acquire a controlling interest in Titan Bank's parent holding company. The current board will resign. A new board will be appointed. He smiled at Adrian. Under new management, so to speak. The offer is on the table for the next 60 minutes. I suggest you get downtown, Marcus. You have a lot to discuss. The world had tilted on its axis. Isabella felt the floor drop out from beneath her. The entire structure of her reality, her confidence, her status, her family's wealth, it was all built on a foundation of sand. And the man she had just tried to relegate to a life of financial dependency was the one controlling the tide. She looked at Adrian, at his calm, resolute face. The quiet man she had married was gone. In his place was a stranger, a king who had been living disguised as a pauper in her own home. The post-nuptial agreement lay on the desk between them, a monument to her own spectacular, catastrophic ignorance. The small, insignificant USB drive sat beside it, a symbol of a power so vast she couldn't even comprehend its scale. She had tried to freeze his account. He was about to acquire the bank. The immediate aftermath was a blur of panicked phone calls and shattered pride. Marcus, his face ashen, had stumbled out of the room, barking into his phone at his assistant, his lawyer, at anyone who would listen. He was a man watching his kingdom crumble, and the architect of its destruction was standing silently in his study. Isabella remained frozen in her chair, her mind unable to process the sheer scale of the reversal. Her entire life had been a climb, a careful, strategic ascent up the corporate and social ladder. She had measured her progress by her title, her salary, the prestige of her employer. Now she was discovering that the ladder she had been climbing was propped against a building that her own husband owned. She looked at Adrian, her eyes pleading. Adrian, I didn't know. It was the weakest, most pathetic defense, and they both knew it. That's the problem, Isabella, he said, his voice softer now, tinged with a deep, profound sadness. You didn't know because you never asked. You never cared. You saw what you wanted to see, a simple, unambitious man who needed your guidance. You built a narrative that made you feel powerful and important, and you ignored every piece of evidence that contradicted it. He walked over to the window and looked out at the manicured, floodlit gardens of her father's estate. Do you have any idea how hard it was? To watch you, day after day, belittle the very work that was paying for the clothes on your back, the roof over your head, the car you drove. To listen to you and your father mock my hobby at dinner parties, while I was closing deals that would define the future of global finance? He turned back to her. I hid it for you, Izzy. In the beginning, I hid my success because I didn't want it to intimidate you. I wanted you to shine. I wanted to be the supportive husband. But somewhere along the way, my support turned into your ammunition. My quietness became your excuse to treat me like a child. Julian, who had been quietly observing the interaction, cleared his throat. Adrian, we should go. The board will be convened. There are formalities. Adrian nodded. He looked at Isabella one last time. The account freeze, that was the final straw. It wasn't about the money, it was about the cruelty of it. To do that on that day, you used your power not to help, but to humiliate. You took my grief and you weaponized it. And you did it using a system I built to create security and trust. He walked towards the door, pausing beside her chair. I'm not doing this to punish you, he said, and she knew he was telling the truth. I'm doing this to stop the charade. I'm tired of living a lie. I'm tired of being someone I'm not, to appease someone you've become. He and Julian left. The sound of the heavy study door closing behind them was a sound of absolute finality. Isabella sat alone in the deafening silence, the smell of her father's scotch suddenly cloying and cheap. She looked at the post-nuptial agreement on the desk, its pages filled with clauses designed to protect her from a threat that had never existed. Then her eyes fell on the small gray USB drive Adrian had left behind. She reached for it, her hand trembling. It was warm from where it had been sitting. It was so simple, so ordinary. It was the key to everything, the key to the kingdom she had never known he possessed. She had held all the power in their relationship, she had thought. but she had been holding a toy sword while he commanded an army. The days that followed were a cascade of consequences. The news broke first in the financial press, in a terse, carefully worded statement. Global holding company Cromwell Sterling Investments announces strategic partnership and leadership restructuring with Nexus Innovations. Adrian Sterling, founder and chief architect of Nexus, to assume role of chairman of the board. The name Adrian Sterling sent a shockwave through the industry. The ghost was real. He had a name and a face, and he was now in charge. For Isabella, the fallout was swift and brutal. She was called into a meeting with Titan Bank's head of HR and a team of stone-faced lawyers. Her access badge had already been deactivated. The meeting was short. They presented her with a printout of the internal security logs from the day of the funeral and the following Monday. Her actions constituted a gross violation of the bank's code of conduct, a breach of client privacy, and a misuse of corporate systems for personal reasons. She was fired, effective immediately. The security log, her own digital signature on every damning action, was irrefutable. She was escorted from the building, her personal effects to be mailed to her. Her father, Marcus, fared little better. The new management at the holding company took a very close look at its portfolio. Marcus's import-export business was heavily leveraged, with massive loans from Titan Bank. The loans had been approved under favorable terms, thanks to his position on the board. The new risk assessment committee, appointed by Adrian, deemed the loans to be an unacceptable level of risk. They called them in, all of them. Marcus was forced into a fire sale of assets to cover the debt, his empire dismantled piece by piece by the cold, impartial logic of the very financial system he had once manipulated for his own benefit. Isabella moved out of the house. There was no dramatic fight, no shouting match. The conflict was already over. She packed her bags in a haze of disbelief. The house, which had once felt like her grand achievement, now felt like a museum of her own ignorance. Every object, every piece of art, every custom furnishing was a testament to a life she had been living, but had never truly seen. Adrian didn't ask her to leave. He simply let her. He gave her space, and in that space, the only possible action was to retreat. She went to stay with her parents in their now much smaller, rented townhouse. The air there was thick with blame and recrimination. Her father, a broken man, blamed her for provoking Adrian, for being the catalyst for their downfall. Her mother wept silently. A month after she had left, a package arrived for her. It was from a law firm. Inside was not a summons for divorce, as she had expected, but a set of documents. Adrian had set up a trust in her name. It wasn't a lavish sum, not the kind of money that would allow her to resume her old life. But it was enough. Enough to live on, to get back on her feet, to start over. It was not a golden parachute, it was a life raft. A real one this time. Attached was a simple, handwritten note. It was the first communication she had received from him since that night in the study. Izzy, it read, you once told me I needed to be more reliable. This is me being reliable. Use this to find a life that makes you happy, not just one that looks successful. Be well, Adrian. She sat with the note for a long time, the tears she had been holding back finally falling. It wasn't a gesture of love or forgiveness. It was a gesture of closure. It was the final, quiet, devastating act of a man who had won so completely that he could afford to be merciful. He wasn't her husband anymore. He was a benevolent force of nature that had passed through her life, leaving it irrevocably altered. He had taken his finances seriously. He had tidied up the mess, and she, to her eternal regret, had been the mess. 6 months later, Adrian stood on the observation deck of a half-finished skyscraper in the heart of the city. The wind whipped at his coat as he looked out at the sprawling urban landscape. He was not alone. Julian was beside him, and so was a woman, an architect named Elena, who was pointing out details of the surrounding buildings, her eyes alight with passion for her craft. Adrian was listening intently, asking sharp, insightful questions. He had taken a step back from the day-to-day operations of the bank, leaving that to Julian and the new board. He had found that owning a thing was far less interesting than building it. This skyscraper was his new project. He was funding it, yes, but he was also co-designing it. His knowledge of structural systems and complex networks finding a new, physical form. He had learned a great deal in the past year. He had learned that hiding your strength to protect someone else's ego is a fool's errand. He learned that respect cannot be demanded, only earned, and that true power lies not in controlling others, but in controlling oneself. He had not become cruel or vindictive. The dismantling of Marcus's empire and the firing of Isabella were not acts of revenge. They were simply the logical consequences of their own actions, the inevitable result of a system being corrected. He had reset the balance. He thought, occasionally, of Isabella. He hoped the trust had given her the freedom to find a new path. He bore her no ill will, only a kind of distant, sorrowful pity for the person she had been. Their story was a cautionary tale, a moral fable played out in the sterile world of high finance. The architect, Elena, laughed at something he said, a genuine unforced sound. She saw him not as a source of wealth or status, but as a peer, a fellow creator. She was interested in his ideas, not his bank balance. It was a new and exhilarating feeling. He looked out at the city, at the endless network of streets, buildings, and lives, all connected in a complex invisible web. He had once built such a web in the digital world. Now he was building it in steel and glass. He had lost a wife, but he had found himself. He had faced humiliation and had not broken. He had been given every reason to become a monster, and had chosen instead to become a better man. His mother's words echoed in his memory. You see the world differently, Adrian. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small for that. He was no longer small. He was finally standing at his full height, and the view was magnificent. The story of Adrian and Isabella serves as a powerful reminder that true worth is not measured by titles, salaries, or the approval of others. It's measured by integrity, by patience, and by the quiet, unseen work we do when no one is watching. Adrian's greatest strength wasn't his fortune, it was his character. He endured disrespect with dignity, and when the time came, he acted not with malice, but with a clarity that was both devastating and just. What do you think is the most important lesson from this story? Is it about the dangers of arrogance or the power of hidden strength? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. And if this story of vindication and moral justice resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more stories that make you think and feel. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time.